Welcome everybody to today's lesson. This lesson is lesson 1-3.2, How Islam Saved the West. I would like to begin this lesson by quickly reviewing the fact that this is the entire Middle Ages, the entire medieval period is a period where we're talking about Europeans being in decline. That is, the European civilization following the collapse of the Roman Empire has entered into the Dark Ages. So we are in the midst of kind of a low for European culture, education, economics, all of it. The wealth, prosperity, culture of the Roman Empire has not recovered. Despite some of the positive things that we're seeing, we're not seeing a civilization on the level that the Roman Empire had. This is a dark age in Europe. But like we talked about way back at the beginning, this is really just a European dark age. In other areas of the world, we really do see a flowering of culture. One of those areas is within the Islamic Empire. From about the year 622, this is where Islam first breaks onto the scene in a major way, all the way up till 1250 AD, where the Mongols really deal the Islamic Empire a serious blow. We're in the middle of an Islamic golden age. This is 600 years of Islamic ascendancy, where they really face no serious long-term setbacks. That's not to say that they don't stumble on things from time to time, just to say that Islam is mostly expanding, mostly seeing success after success after success. And during this time, we really see the center of Islamic culture flowering, and out of a few locations, notably Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, which is in Islamic Spain, we see real cultural centers emerging and impacting the world outside of them. And really, these are the premier cultural centers of the world, with the exception of a few locations in China around this time of the world in history. One of the aspects of this flowering of Islamic culture can be seen in the success of their military. During this 600-year stretch, Islam really faces only temporary challenges to their expansion. Very few outright defeats and permanent setbacks. A few of the exceptions, first one we talked about, the Battle of Tours. This is where Islam tried to expand into France and was defeated by Charles the Hammer, beginning the Carolingian Renaissance. So that was one exception. Another one, the First Crusade, we're going to be coming up on pretty soon, so we'll talk about that. But certainly that was a setback for Islam. And also there were multiple attempts to take Constantinople, but despite the overall weakening of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople just remained as a hurdle that the Islamic Empire for most of the Middle Ages just could not cross. Constantinople was just too well defended, and for most of the early and Middle Ages, that will stop Islamic expansion. There will, of course, come a time where Constantinople is no longer that barrier that it once was. Other evidences of this Islamic golden age include the Islamic sciences. Muslim scientists were using experimentation to learn more about their world long before Europeans were. We see this flowering of science and experimentation and really learning about their world by testing their world. And through experimentation and observation, Muslims learned a lot more about astronomy and medicine and biology than any Europeans at the time. Europeans, by contrast to the Islamic Empire, really looked like a backward civilization. They just, couldn't figure out anything the Muslims believed. And they really looked backwards and were backwards compared to the advances that were happening in places like Baghdad. When it comes to Islamic philosophy, as I look at this slide, I think that I'm probably leaning a little bit too much toward what they inherited from the Greeks, but this is where Islamic philosophy gets a lot of its start. They look at the Greek philosophers and their teaching and their process of reasoning, and this had saturated the Greek Empire and the Greek-speaking world that was later taken on by Islam. Now, Muslims will study these philosophies, but they also build on them quite a bit and mix them with their own religious beliefs and their own learnings about the world through scientific advances, and expand upon early philosophers to really advance the area of philosophy. You also have notably several schools that teach into philosophy, notably in Cordoba in Spain. And this is where thinking like Aristotelian thinking, that is, thinking that was done by Aristotle. We also have Plato and Socrates. All that gets reintroduced from Europe. During the Dark Ages, all of that was forgotten, was not written down, or the church had suppressed it. And it now is going to creep back in thanks to the influence of the Islamic Empire. Now, this spread, as I just mentioned, into Europe comes from Cordova, but it also comes from other areas as well. But I think it's worth, with Spain, once again emphasizing the fact that prior to the Crusades, the Islamic Empire was very tolerant with other religions. Christians, Jews were not persecuted on religious grounds within this empire most of the time. That's not going to come about until after the Crusades. So we have Islamic Spain, the Emirate of Cordova, where we have a lot of tolerance. We have Muslims, Christians, and Jews all working together to advance science. Now, these Christians in Cordova are going to have a lot of experience and a lot of contact with other Christian pilgrims going on pilgrimages. And other Christians will learn about scientific and philosophic advances through these contacts. Likewise, a little bit later on, Crusaders, who in the 12th and 13th century are going off to the Holy Land, and this has been, part of the Islamic Empire. They're also going to bring back some of this knowledge that they encounter in the East, and they're going to bring it back to the West, where some of it originated, but was lost during those Dark Ages. Finally, I want to quickly address the role of Byzantium, because some of you, I'm sure, are thinking, what about the Byzantine Empire? This is a continuation of the Roman Empire. They should still have all this logic and reasoning and knowledge. And in a lot of cases, they do, but they haven't been emphasizing it. The Byzantines, like Western Europe, have become very driven by religion. And there's a lot of religious practices and principles that were conflicting with these old Greek thought and Roman science that was not seen as religious in nature and therefore de-emphasized in society. Byzantines still had some of that knowledge sitting in libraries collecting dust. They just weren't emphasizing it, and therefore it was not spreading out of Byzantium the same way that it will spread out of the Islamic Empire. And it won't be until Western European crusaders attack and defeat the city of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade, where they will start to uncover some of this lost Roman and Greek knowledge and bring some of that back with them when they return to the West. So that is it for today. We're going to be looking more at this ancient knowledge, the Greeks and the Romans, and how that gets introduced in our next lesson as well. But today I really wanted to emphasize the fact that the Islamic Empire is going to have a lot to do with preserving that knowledge and reintroducing it to the West. So I hope you enjoyed today, and I will see you tomorrow.